Hello, Crusoe, and welcome to Blue Creek Cymru. Today I'm talking with Philip Owen, who is a Gwlad candidate in the constituency of Brycheiniog Tawe Nedd. Welcome to the podcast, Philip. Thank you for being a guest.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here. I grew up in Wales in Breconshire, and my parents, or my mother, kept a hardware shop, and my father was a plumber, as did my grandparents before them. I've got very deep roots in the area. We can go back, and actually everybody there has. It's the sort of place where, quite frankly, everybody, it's certainly in those days, was related to everybody else, at least at fourth or fifth cousin sort of level. In the Scouts, I got to be invited to represent Breconshire at the 12th World Jamboree in Idaho in 1967. And then we spent some time with families in Kansas City. Remarkably, Idaho featured again later on in my life, but that was inconceivable at the time. I did well in my O-levels. I got 10 O-levels, and as a result, I got invited to join the sixth form in the boarding school in Brecon, Christ College, Brecon, as the very first state school entrant into the sixth form, and I still have the scars to prove it. The same year, the headmaster introduced girls into the sixth form from the Brecon Convent, and also started taking overseas students from Hong Kong. And incidentally, the state schoolers, the girls, and the Hong Kong sixth formers now are over half the pupils there. Did well enough at A-levels to get to Durham to study engineering science. But before I did that, and this was very important in my formation, I signed up for an apprenticeship with a company called GEC Machines, and we made very large electric motors and generators, things the size of a house. Simon's a mining engineer here. We made, for example, mind winders for gold mines in South Africa. So hauling cages 4,000 feet deep, colossal things, and motors for steel mills, processing the steel, and also the hydro generator for the generators for the Dinorwic pumped hydro station in North Wales, which was being built at the time. And
did that take you out to places like South Africa, or was that other people's work?
No, it did take me to Aberthorpe B power station in South Wales, well, a bit of a busman's holiday, where helped installing some of the transformers for what was an absolutely colossal power station by the standards of the time. They weren't. GEC wasn't going anywhere. Power engineering wasn't really going anywhere. I managed to find a job in Wales, and a good point. Going back to O-levels and things and build school, everybody with an O-level left, basically.
Left Wales?
In Wales, yeah. In mid-Wales. It was a bilateral school. There was a secondary modern stream and a grammar school stream, and we did sports together, and we did sort of woodwork and metalwork, or cookery and needlework together. But the secondary modern stream did CSEs, and the grammar stream did O levels, and essentially everyone who got more than like 3 O levels left somewhere to do something else, if not a degree, then training in a bank or something of this sort, but not in Builth. There was no employment in Mid Wales, and that's one of the reasons, one of the first reasons I started thinking about the politics and economics of the situation. Actually,
you didn't think, sorry, you didn't think to do like many and leave Wales, leave the United Kingdom on engineering work?
See how? I mean, I had a cousin in Toronto who was doing very well, inventing prospecting instruments in a firm called Barrington Instruments. But he'd gone to Canada when you could just get on an aeroplane, get off the plane, and immediately find a job. At the time, the Canadians and indeed the Australians had become much more protective about their market, their labour markets. Britain had just passed the Commonwealth Citizens Act, or whatever it was, or had passed it about 1967, and as a result, we put barriers up, and everybody else put barriers up, and I ended up again in South Wales. I tried hard to come back to Wales during my career with a firm then called Control Data, making magnetic discs for computer disk drives, initially 14 inches across, which is easy. I advocated the 3.5-inch disk drive in conjunction with a firm in Scotland called Rodyne, who are really credited with being the inventors of the 3.5-inch hard disk drive, Sony having invented a floppy disk at that size as well. And
it's taking me back to my primary school days of floppy disks.
Yeah, well, these things are accidents. When you write them up afterwards, it's far-sighted strategy. But
Yeah.
no. But as soon as Rodyne started getting into position with the 3.5-inch disk drives, Minneapolis came in and said, "We're having this product line from you now," and that went off. And actually, I didn't fancy moving to the US. I'd have moved to Canada or Australia, but I didn't fancy moving to the US. Hewlett Packard was setting up a factory and research center outside Bristol, and I decided to go there instead, looking after their European disk drive market and the worldwide tape market, or a particular kind of tape market.
But you did mention earlier about Idaho coming back into your life. So I'm assuming, and I don't jump ahead in your story, and I have had conversations for this podcast with Welsh diaspora that are there. So is that I'm intrigued to know how that came into your life.
Actually, I'll go back now. At Control Data in Bryn Mawr in South Wales, I was by now very active in the Liberal Party. I've been in the Liberal Party and its successors for 50 years. I was in the Liberal Party 50 years, and I was in rugby with GC as well. I stood for county council there. I campaigned Keep Rugby in Europe in 1975, and I stood for Merthyr and Rumney as the parliamentary candidate in the closing months of my time
as a Liberal candidate.
Yes, a Liberal candidate, Liberal Alliance technically, but yes, it was 1983. This is yes, and I was also I'll leave this for the political bit. I'll go back to the political bit.
Sorry to ruin your flow. I was just curious.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. Hewlett Packard took me back to Idaho. They had their own disk drive factory in Boise, and other factories scattered around the US. So I did a lot of traveling in the western half of North America. And this was really, I did this for 30 years, and this was really spectacular. I got work with the European Space Agency. I got work with somebody called the Defense Evaluation Research Agency when they were privatizing. Some of this was a subcontractor. I got a lot of data storage work from a firm called MacArthur Stroud. They passed it on to me, but with people like IBM and Kodak and Hewlett Packard and so on. With another firm called JRA Aerospace and Technology, where I got a lot of the really advanced technology transfer work as a subcontractor. So I was dealing with voyages to Mars, and I was dealing with growing onions. One of the JRA assignments was to evaluate 120 inventions from the Russian Academy of Sciences. I did that. It gave me a huge number of contacts in Russia. JRA withdrew from the technology transfer business, so I started a business on trade investment in Russia.
So that was working alongside Russian colleagues, was it?
I first of all, single-handed. I ended up employing 3 Russians. I taught myself Russian, but I ended up employing 3 people in the UK, 3 Russians full-time, and a few more Russians as per the contract demanded ultimately. And a drone in 2012 which had more capabilities than anything you've seen from Ukraine, and Britain was making them then. Yes, we've.
So what happened?
And nobody wanted on either side ever came to me and said, "Do you want to be a spy for us?" They really, really lost out in both directions.
It sounds like it. But what happened to the drone? How come that didn't develop further?
Russian military and state spending in general is quite corrupt. The private sector, fine. If you're dealing with the private sector, it's a bit self-cleaning. Competition cleans out the inefficient and ineffective, and bribery makes people inefficient and ineffective. But the state sector, there's the guy charged with it, but most of his budget's gone to the layers above. So he's never got the flexibility in the budget to do anything for himself.
How have you managed the journey from Liberal Alliance to Gwlad?
Right. Well, I mean, go back and I say I first started getting interested because everybody had to leave. Everybody with any education had to leave Bilth, and also there was still some lingering Welsh language in Bilth at the time, original rather than sort of Cymraeg dialects from being taught Welsh in school rather than at home. There's in a class of 30, maybe 4 or 5 children spoke Welsh. In the primary school, nobody spoke Welsh. I mean, nobody's spoken Welsh in a castle town in Wales for 800 years. Once you move outside the parish boundary, it's different. But as a first language, Welsh, they've all been Flemish and English in the castle towns since forever. But
is Cymraeg, is that your first language then?
It's not my first language. My mother's family in particular spoke Welsh at the level of my grandparents, but they did spend a generation around Tredegar. And what my grandmother used to tell me was that she was the oldest. She spoke to her parents in Welsh, but but she was the oldest of 9, and her younger brothers at the tail end, their parents would speak to them in Welsh, but the boys would reply in English. This was with the First World War in the middle as the transition. And if I look at my mother and aunt's Sunday school certificates, 1929, they're in Welsh. Then there's a gap, and in 1931, they come back in English, and you can see that the war and the depression between them, you can see it in the mechanics of my own family's loss of the language happening there as well. And I thought another line of the family was something of a scholar. He was a lawyer and other things. And his book collection of 5,000 books was one of the founding collections of the Welsh National Library, which at the time was Cardiff Library, not Aberystwyth. But without Welsh, I can't read his diaries. So Gwlad was mostly a splinter group from Plaid Cymru, originally called the Hydro Group, I think. And I'm not sure exactly the details of when of the gap between the Hydro Group and Gwlad founding in 2018. I wasn't there, but we've also got several ex-Liberal Democrats and one quite prominent ex-Conservative in the national governing body as well. So it's not just a Plaid Cymru splinter at all, and it shows in our discussions and some of our policy discussions as well.
Is Gwlad able to field candidates in all 16 constituencies?
No, it was short of money. Probably got enough people scattered around if we pushed hard, but we decided we would work with the willing within our budgetary capabilities rather than try and get every seat in Wales. And it took Plaid Cymru 40 years from foundation to get their first parliamentary seat.
I was going to ask if you've got a view, because you mentioned about the length of time it's taken for those various parties to really build up a head of steam, as it were. As I mentioned to you before, I live in Quebec, and there's Parti Québécois there, which has had a similar background story in individuals leaving the Canadian Liberal Party to form Parti Québécois. But when I speak to members of Parti Québécois, they're quite astonished that Plaid Cymru and others in Wales are older. They're 100 years old, and yet they're so far behind what Parti Québécois has achieved. In 20 years, they went from founding to having a referendum on independence. So why do you think that seems to be the case in Wales? Why do you think it seems to take us so long to build that momentum and support?
Well, I think you've got there's some history with Lloyd George, which we'll go back to, but I think you've also got this issue that you've got what Gwynalf Williams, the historian, used to describe, that you've got Welsh Wales, you've got English Wales, and you've got American Wales, and they don't speak to each other. American Wales, other people call it the Valleys Wales, basically, and Gwynalf Williams called them the American Wales. Other people use different terms, but I think whereas in Quebec you've got a single unified culture, you've got internal division in Wales that perhaps you don't have to quite the same extent in Quebec. So the other thing, going back to Lloyd George's movement Cymru Fydd, Wales Will Be, wanted home rule specifically, not quite independence. And now what home rule meant was a little bit, certainly much more home rule than modern devolution. I mean, modern devolution doesn't give the Welsh government the powers a county council had in 1926. County councils could do more things, raise more money then than the Welsh government now. But Lloyd George was talking about home rule, and the Liberals and then the Liberal Democrats later have stayed with federalism on following on from that Lloyd George tradition, and that's actually another reason why no longer a Liberal. I think federalism isn't going to work with London in them. Inside the EU, London was diluted, but outside the EU, London is just too big. It's not going to work. We need independence. Yeah, but so there's division basically, and I think we're seeing the American Wales starting to switch to Welsh nationalism. English Wales still isn't there. English Wales is still not voting for Welsh nationalism, but there's been division, so it's taken longer because of that. Yeah.
And have you a view on how we bring all of Wales together to think as Welsh?
I think a prosperity, and we will come to this if there's some time left. Prosperity is part of the answer. We were, when Lloyd George was touting forms of independence for Wales, we were booming. We were very well off. The coal miners were on 4 sovereigns a week or whatever it was, but they were we were well off. We were building the National Library. We were building the university on donations from the very wealthy, to be sure, but also on donations, in the case of the university famously, from the miners as well. We were building institutions. We had a lot of money in the economy, and there was a lot of confidence about Wales. And then we had the First World War, the Irish Free State, and that all put things on hold. And then there was the Depression. Yeah.
Why do you think the Irish and the Free State, and then Ireland becoming independent from the empire as was, didn't have the reverse effect on Wales and show us an example and galvanise the Welsh to want that for themselves?
I think it did on the Welsh-speaking Welsh. I think Saunders Lewis and the other early Welsh nationalists were inspired by the Irish, and their attack on the RAF base, which was a founding moment in applied Cymru history, probably was inspired by Irish nationalism. I think they were some of the Easter Rising prisoners were kept near Bala, I think.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
There was and there was some discussion between them and Welsh nationalists from inside the Fro Cymraeg. So Welsh Wales did have that contact, but I think the other two versions of Wales didn't, and so it's taken longer and it's been more divided. Yeah. But what we need is to build some prosperity, and it's not the focus of the present Welsh government. The present Welsh government, I think, sees itself as a deliverer of social services. And the largest part of the budget is NHS Wales, and the second largest part of the budget is care. But we're not going to get prosperity unless we start investing in infrastructure, in skilled and flexible workforce. Most of that is going to be education, and most of that is going to be primary and secondary education. That's where you get the flexibility of mind that when your engineering degree doesn't pan out and it's actually the media studies graduate who was despised 10 years ago but is now making a fortune as a social media influencer, is the cutting edge of the economy. So
it's about changing that mindset, and as you already mentioned, that making the Senedd not just a glorified county council, but actually a government and a group of ministers that have aspiration and a narrative for a nation.
Yes, the narrative for a nation is a key part of this, and blending in the prosperity. So it's about infrastructure, it's about education, and it's about building a financial environment that invests in Welsh firms, a private sector financial environment that invests in Welsh firms.
So I've spoken to a lot of diaspora on this podcast, and that is something that they have said to me time and time again, is Wales, as you just said, the government doesn't seem to have an easy avenue to welcome diaspora and diaspora money and intellect back into Wales, but also there doesn't seem to be, unlike the Irish and the Scots say, an understanding of what Wales is internationally.
Yes.
So there isn't the story there, and that's very hard to then bring investors who aren't connected emotionally, historically to Wales. If they're your business partners, if I think about myself, if I want to do something in mining in Wales, I'll talk to my business partners. Well, they're Australian and Canadian, so why would they care? I've got to have a reason, and that's an easier story to sell if you're trying to convince people about Ireland, because people know what Ireland is.
Yes, Ireland and Scotland have both got much stronger identities and as you say, narratives. I mean, part of that, I think, is, certainly for Scotland, compared with Wales, Scotland had universities in medieval times and we didn't. It took us until the late 19th century because we had a colossal impact on invention. And in the 19th century, our impact in the 19th century is at least as big as Scotland's, and can look England in the eye. Certainly, if you call the Industrial Revolution new forms of energy and new materials.
I always ask guests to think about what or where they would like Cymru to be in 15 years from now. What's your, and this is, could be a flight of fancy, but where's your heart say you'd like it to be?
And I'd like to see basically a Wales that can produce ideas to improve the economy, and by that I include things like care and healthcare and looking after older people. We ought to have perhaps a leading edge section in our economy, leading healthcare devices and practices. But so I'd like to see the whole backing of smaller firms improving, and that will fix a lot of things. If the economy is prosperous, a lot of people who are now on disability will come off disability. I'm not suggesting they're faking it. I'm suggesting their options are so limited and closed that it's not psychological in that they will it, but they're psychologically trapped because they're limited. That sort of disability will disappear from the Welsh economy if we can offer opportunities.
If you have enjoyed listening to this podcast, there are many more on our list, which is on YouTube and wherever you get your pods. We also have a full list of all the candidates on the New Wales website, which is new.wales. Diolch for listening.